Hey, Jason.
Welcome everybody to Literally Alive. We are recording, just to remind everybody. And if you do not want to be recorded, you're welcome to turn off your video. I do remind everybody to also turn off their sound. So if you're not muted, please mute yourself at this moment. Literally Alive is hosted by Littoral Books, Maine's independent publisher of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. And we are happy tonight to introduce Suzanne Farrell-Smith, author of Small Off Things, who will be in conversation with Laurie Easter, who is an author from Portland, Oregon. I have her bio right here, which I'm happy to read. She's an author of the memoir and essays of All the Leavings, which is an Oregon State University Press finalist for the 2023 Oregon Book Award in Creative Nonfiction. She's also the winner of the 2022 Next Generation Indie Book Award in Memoir. Her work has been published in The Rumpus, Brevity, Under the Gum Tree, and Hippocampus magazine, among others, and is anthologized in The Shell Game, Writers Play with Borrowed Forms and a Harp in the Stars, an anthology of lyric essays. She holds an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts, where she met Suzanne Farrell-Smith. She lives off the grid in Southern Oregon. Laurie, thank you so much for taking over my role tonight. And I would love for you to introduce Suzanne Farrell-Smith, and I'm going to turn it over to the two of you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So nice to be here, and I'm so happy to be celebrating Suzanne and her book. So yeah, we're here to celebrate Suzanne Farrell-Smith, the author, not the ballerina. Her new book, Small Off Things, Meditations from an Anxious Mind. I met Suzanne, as my bio said, when we were both pursuing our MFAs at Vermont College in 2010. We were in the same workshop led by Sue Silverman and Robert Vivian. And I instantly fell in love with both Suzanne and her writing. We became fast friends, and now here we are 13 years later, celebrating Suzanne's third book that's published, the essay collection, Small Off Things, Meditations from an Anxious Mind. I have to show it off. It's so beautiful. So I wanted to read some of the blurbs that were written about Suzanne's book. Risa Nye, author of There Was a Fire Here, a memoir, says this about Small Off Things. In this outstanding collection of essays, Suzanne Farrell-Smith poses existential questions. What is fear? What is memory or loss or anxiety? And turns them over and over, examining and exploring, taking the reader with her as she finds her way closer to answers. Readers go back and forth in time with her as she takes an unflinching look at the difficult challenges and joys life has placed in her path. At times contemplative, at times raw, these essays will stay with you long after you turn the last page. And Jody Poloni, who's in the house tonight, author of They Could Live With Themselves, says this. Small Off Things is a great big wonder of a book. Writing with both gravity and levity in clear-eyed prose, Suzanne Farrell-Smith guides readers on a journey in which memory is elusive, but where the whole persists, like phantom pain, constant companion, continually reinventing itself by filling up with life's bright spots, then with some new grief emptying again. I've never read anything like it. And this is what I have to say about it. In precise and captivating prose, Suzanne Farrell-Smith writes of the small off things of everyday life. Fear, self-consciousness, worry. In her talented hands, these quotidian things loom large and important, even as they commingle and are juxtaposed with topics of loss, disability, and otherness that both enlighten and challenge notions of what is typical. These essays are honest, deep, poignant, and clever. I was engrossed from beginning to end. Okay, Suzanne Farrell-Smith is the author of 3 books: The Memory Sessions, a memoir about searching for lost childhood memory; The Writing Shop, a teaching guidebook; and, of course, Small Off Things, Meditations from an Anxious Mind, essay collection she will read from tonight. She is widely published, has been notable in Best American Essays, and won a Pushcart Prize. She teaches at Westport Writers Workshop and publishes Water Wheel Review. Suzanne lives with her husband and 3 sons in Connecticut. So welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Thank you, Robert, Agnes. This means the world to me to see so many familiar faces, family. My sisters are here, aunts, dear friends, colleagues from our MFA program, and just a whole range of faces and names. So it means a ton to me. Thank you so much, Littoral Books, Agnes, for putting this together. But yeah, as Laurie said, taking my manuscript and just crafting this beautiful thing, this object out of it. I just feel stunned by it. And please, if you haven't picked up Laurie's book, All the Leavings, you ought to do that. It's a wonderful book, also an essay collection. I can't recommend it highly enough. So I'm going to start tonight. I'm going to read a few pieces, and in between, Laurie will ask some questions so we can have a conversation. And I'm going to start with a piece called Marjorie Asana. Our mother, arms weary and hands cramped from gripping the walker, sags, while my sisters and I move with her dutifully, like porters around a queen's litter. We shift her hips and knees, slide her heels and walker wheels. It is slow work. Her swollen feet stretch the purple streaked skin, and at each touch she cries out. She feels pain, but as of this morning, can no longer control her lower half, so we move for her, just 7 or 8 yards from the wicker couch on the porch where she's been sleeping, to the bathroom. By the time we round the kitchen table and reach the bathroom door, 30 minutes later, our civility and her body have folded. It seems she is about to fall, and then she says, "I'm falling, I'm falling." My sisters grab at parts of her like children again, prodding for single parent attention. I spot an opening, crawl under the walker, and arch my back into cat pose as she falls, which happens so slow, it's more like a melting. My mother drapes over the dome I've offered her, the way a baby sprawls across its mother's bare chest, yielding. Half on the bathroom rug and half off, I bear my mother's weight, hoping my sisters will figure out how to get her from here to the toilet to sit. Since giving birth to twins 4 months ago, I've seen the note declining to travel to meet her latest grandchildren, the note canceling Thanksgiving, the note wondering whether Christmas should take place, the note saying she's too anxious to leave the house, the note about losing all sense of taste. Since arriving Friday evening to introduce my mother to my sons, I've seen the plastic sheeting over the couch, the diminished hair, the dormant car, the annual gift opening spent bundled in crocheted blankets, the thirst unquenched even after 3 glasses of cranberry juice. Beneath the weight of the things I've seen and the weight of my mother, I think, her joints are getting bad, aren't they? And I think this apricot colored rug isn't pretty. And I think our husbands and children must be gone by now since we pleaded for privacy. And I think that I already can't remember what I just yelled at my mother from under her body, but I know she yelled back, "That's not helpful." And I think we should move her bed down to the den after this. Make sure she avoids stairs after this, because I still think there will be an after this. When my husband and I bought our house in the Connecticut woods, I stood in our shed to assess what was left behind, not knowing yet that the ceiling was blanketed by sprickets or spider crickets. There's a sound sprickets make that's barely there. It's not their sound. They can't chirp, but rather the sound of hundreds of toothpick legs skimming old wood. Despite the fact that they gather in large numbers, sprickets keep quiet in the dark. So you won't open all the doors and windows, switch on a bare bulb, blow a fan. They don't have wings either, so their only defense when scared is to leap, often directly at the perceived predator. Their best bet is to remain meditation still. But I felt them in the shed as I counted rusty screens and paint cans. I felt the slight charge that said something was above me, and if I moved too fast or lost my balance, something unusual would happen. I backed out of the shed without ever turning on the light. One of my sisters says she's going to call an ambulance, and for the first time that morning, that lifetime, my mother agrees. My sisters, with some kind of magic, heave our mother up and over to the toilet seat. Relieved of her, I sink into cow pose and stretch, shifting my hips the way I've just been shifting my mother's. While a sister grabs the corded wall phone to dial 911, my mother looks at me the way she often has, her face taut with the onset of a reproof. I look away and shake my head slowly left and right before switching direction, nodding, sinking my chin to the floor, then pulling my heart forward, my gaze to the ceiling.
So beautiful, Suzanne. Just lovely. Your descriptions, your reading is so, I could listen to you read for so long. You're really good at it.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to start with talking about your title. I think it's such a perfect title that works both metaphorically to describe the ordinary things that are a part of life, like the anxiousness and worry, fear, self-consciousness, repetitive thoughts, those things that can feel a bit off in our mind and in our body. And it's also a description of the writing in terms of form, small short essays, also known as flash. And so we can talk about what flash is too, because some people might not be familiar with that term. That each contain their own individual story, but it creates a whole fabric of a narrative that when you read it together, you get this big picture. So I guess this is a two-part question. Can you talk about how you came to the title, and perhaps that will segue you into a discussion on the writing of Flash and how this book evolved?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The title came to me in the same instant that the book came to me. I'll first say, so Small Off Things is in many ways the story of my adult life to date. And so it includes these big, significant seismic changes in marriage and deaths and children. But each piece is just focuses on one tiny thing, a weird look or a stranger's comment or a moment when I have to do an action I've never done before. The kind of thing that just makes you feel a little funny. And I realized with these pieces that I was writing that anxiety is what drives them all. And anxiety is when your amygdala is set off. And so the word off has always been with me. It's this, it transforms these tiny, seemingly insignificant moments or encounters and just transforms them into something large and meaningful and sometimes very scary. So I always think about the amygdala being set off. My sons have anxiety too, and we each have names for our amygdalas. One calls his Miggy. And so we say, oh, Miggy's being set off to kind of calm Miggy down a little bit. So yeah, small, because they're small, even tiny elements of life and instances. And that word off was always with me. But it's interesting. So it's meditations from an anxious mind. But lately, I've been thinking about it as Small Off Things, not a beach read.
That's hilarious. I love that. It's perfect. Although I don't know, when you have these small pieces, I think it's conducive for being a beach read, right? Because you could pick it up, you can dive right in, you can go deep for, a few minutes, and then you can set it down and you can go jump in the waves and get refreshed,
That's
So,
true. That's why I do love essay collections.
right? Yeah. That's so fascinating that that the title and the book came to you in that same moment. I think that's really cool. And I'm glad I asked this question because I never would have guessed that. Like, to me, it feels like, oh, one or the other, but that's a really interesting process.
Yeah, it's
So,
while I was researching writing the memory sessions, I was in therapy for memory recovery, and it was about a decade doing that. And I was diagnosed with all 5 major anxiety disorders listed by the Department of Health and Human Services. So when the book came out, then I looked at all these other pieces that I was writing. And that was, I swear it feels like it was within 5 minutes that I saw them all, saw them rooted in different types of anxiety, said, oh, these are pieces rooted in OCD, and these are pieces rooted in panic. And I said, these are the small off things that pick up my anxiety. And so it just kind of clicked. And with my first 2 books, I went back and forth on titles a lot, but with this one, it's just instant, along with the
I
whole
love that.
principle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so great because then it like guides you to the writing too of, it's almost like having a roadmap or something to follow, and I'm sure other things arose while you were creating it. And, you write about a topic and then it triggers an idea or a memory or a thought about another experience, right?
Indeed. And I could see, with OCD, I knew I wanted these 5 sections. It had to be 6 pieces per section. It could not, deviate from that. So I could see the holes, and it did provide a roadmap. And because these small off things continue to happen. Last week, one of my sons dumped a pitcher of water in my laptop, and it was just this little pitcher of water, but it became this huge thing. So I'm writing about it. These things continue to happen. So
Right.
it was it was a wonderful challenge to fill in the holes.
Well, that's what I love about this book too, is that it's so like rooted in reality in terms of what life is really like, right? Like these regular moments that everybody lives, and they're happening all day long, all week long, all month long, right? And then it's got this like I don't want to say snapshot because it's bigger than a snapshot, but it's like this experience of what life is really like and how those small moments do carry so much weight and impact moving through life, And since you're talking about the sections, I just wanted to read the title sections. So give everybody an idea. So the first section is a constant state of emergency. The second one is unwanted thoughts and repeated behaviors. 3 is unexpected episodes of fear. 4 is excessive self-consciousness. 5, exaggerated worry and tension. And that's the final one. So that gives everybody an idea. And I think each section has approximately 6-ish essays. Yeah. So can we talk about flash essays? So one of the things that I'm personally really interested in, and maybe there will be other people here at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. So if anybody has a question, you can type it into the chat if something sparks your interest. So I love the fact that this book is made up of these small essays, and I'm just curious about, well, first I want to say, so you won a pushcart prize, which is a really big deal for your flash essay that was published in Brevity, If You Find a Mouse on a Glue Trap. And so for anybody who has not read that essay, you absolutely must read this essay. It is brilliant. It's a stunning essay about finding a live mouse stuck to a glue trap in the basement of Suzanne's new home that she had just moved into, and the anxiousness and worry that it created in her about what to do about the situation. And so I was surprised that that essay wasn't included in the book because it definitely could fit, right? So maybe you could talk about how you decided which pieces to include in the collection. And I would like to know why you didn't include that one. And were you from the get-go intentionally writing flash because you did have this idea of the small off things? Did that just automatically make you feel that, okay, you're writing about these small off things, then they need to be small pieces of writing? So start with that and then I'll keep.
Yeah, well, so as far as Mouse is anthologized in 2 other places, and I just wanted to challenge myself to write new work. But more than that, the entire rest of the book is in first person and Mouse is in second person, and it just felt different in style, and it's one that cannot be transformed to first. I have another piece in the book that was in third person, and I pretty easily changed it to first. But yeah, Mouse kind of lives in second forever. And in terms of flash, yes, I mean, time constraints. I was really writing a lot of these when I was working on my big memoir. So time constraints, and also just these tiny moments, I think, don't need much more real estate to really explore.
Right. Yeah. So you kind of already answered my question that I was going to ask you about, which came first. Was it the idea or the essays? And so we covered that. Sorry. And I'm just referring to my notes. Okay. So just this morning, I read this piece on the Brevity blog titled, "Is There a Recipe for Writing Successful Flash?" And something that was in this piece that struck me was this quote: "It all comes down to the flash, an event you make happen in your reader's brain as they read your piece. It's an aha, a realization, a knowing that was, until we read the piece, secret in us, and now it's illuminated, awake, and we have it." So do you think that's required in Flash, an aha moment? Does every Flash essay have to be a narrative arc? Like, this really struck me, this idea, because I've been, I guess, struggling with it in my own writing, wondering about this, and you're so successful at writing Flash. So I wanted your opinion. And do you feel there is a recipe for successful Flash?
I don't think it needs a narrative arc. I think some are just a series of images, some is just dialogue, some is just a meditation on a few minutes of a cool April evening. But I do, for me, a successful Flash has core, which is, why are you writing this piece? There has to be a reason. And it has the constitution of it. So the content and the craft are there. All the elements are lovingly and carefully chosen and crafted together. And then compression. So I think of compression, compression, it sort of makes decreases the volume of something without changing the substance of it or the nature of it. And it makes it more powerful. So I always think of a Flash as like a peony bud that's about to bloom, because peony buds are so
I love that.
tight and they're about to explode, but it doesn't explode yet. So yeah, I always teach my students core, constitution and compression. Laurie, I wonder if I should start reading my second piece, just looking at the time. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
So I'm reading the second half of an essay called Big Boy Steps because of the interest of time. I really wanted to, and Laurie and I talked a lot about which pieces to read tonight, and this one we really wanted to read. So I'm reading the second half. The first half shows my son and me as we're trying to walk up the library steps. It was a challenge for him when he was a toddler because he has a genetic deletion. He's missing a handful of genes. It's called a microdeletion. And his particular genes that he's missing makes it difficult for him to learn gross and fine motor skills. So we're dropping into the essay when I'm at a book club meeting about a novel that features a boy with Tourette syndrome. I didn't know anyone at the meeting aside from my new friend. Relative anonymity freed me to share that my son also has a syndrome. I asked the women about whether they, if their child had an invisible disability, would reveal it. One said her friend has a daughter with a disorder, and she's afraid to tell the child because she might use it as a crutch. I think she meant to say excuse. A child who cannot walk without aid has an excuse not to walk. Give the child a crutch and teach her to walk with it. In my son's case, I provide multiple crutches in the form of physical therapy, patient instruction, practice steps. Sometimes I am the crutch. Recently, I stopped with my son on a whim at a farmer's market. It was set up on the slight incline of a grassy hill, a well-worn dirt path between two neat rows of white tents. Closing time approached, so we'd have to move quickly up and down the aisle looking for local tomatoes. With little time and on uneven terrain, I decided to carry my son, his legs wrapped around my waist, his head on my shoulder. For a moment, while studying a table loaded with jars of pickles and jam, I felt not burdened by 35 pounds of boy, but free. We so rarely had time to peruse a farmer's market. In our prolonged hug, we were content. I saw the man before I heard him, mid-50s, light blue linen button-down over khaki shorts, straw hat, sunglasses. He stood behind a bench, looking right at me, and I assumed he would call out to peddle his local fare. Instead, as I passed his tent, he said, "Can't that kid walk?" I almost kept going. Had I done so, my son would not have noticed the man, but instinct stopped me, and I turned to meet his sunglassed gaze. "How much does he weigh?" he said. "I mean, geez, look at you." That kid, not walking, was my kid, now aware of the exchange. Look at you. Yes, look at me. Short and not that strong. My spine was bent to support my son's weight. Look at me, a parent making a moment in our day a little easier, a human crutch. "He has trouble walking," I said. The man pulled his head back and stuttered, Oh. I left. "Mommy? Buggy?" I held my breath, worried about what he'd caught. "Guitar?" My son was now focused on a white-haired woman playing a ukulele and singing folk songs. Maybe he missed the fact that I just revealed to a stranger, and therefore to him, that something was wrong, that he had trouble. Until then, we'd never spoken of his syndrome. To him, physical therapy was normal. Learning to climb was normal. His body, no matter how hard he had to work to plan and carry out movement, was normal. I was grateful he hadn't caught the significance of my words. I wasn't ready for that step just yet. Often, I quiet the ringing around the empty space and listen to my son's wholeness. Right now at the library, and at most places on most days, there's nothing in the world he wants more than to make me smile. "Look, Mommy, I'm doing good," he says. Big boy steps. And he tries again and again, the first foot swinging out and landing squarely, then the second swinging way too far and skipping a step before sliding back to meet the first. By the time we reach the top of the library steps, my son has not done the step over step pattern once. I say, "Good trying, Buggy. I am so proud of you." I'm a little loud, as if performing parenthood to benefit our audience, now a mother with 3 hopping children. Or perhaps my performance is solely for my son. I sense I am manufacturing this moment and ignoring my impatience to ensure he feels safe and happy in his upbringing, to make him and me feel more typical, even as we are very much just ourselves.
I just love that one so much. That ending, just that statement of just being ourselves, it just really gets me. I'm curious about what it's like for you to navigate writing about your children and revealing, really personal details about not only them, but about yourself. And does it come easily for you to do this? So yeah, if you can
Yeah,
talk about that.
I think it's a really important question for so many of us CNF writers who write about the people in our lives. For one, when it comes to writing about me, I don't worry too much, but I do follow a very careful 12-question system to decide if I think a piece does reveal too much. So I ask myself questions like, if I put this piece out into the world, could it change a relationship I have with somebody? If so, would it change for the better or worse? Am I comfortable with the consequences? And if a piece just, or even just an idea, does not, pass those series of questions, then it just goes in the drawer. So I'm pretty rigorous about it. And then in terms of the kids, I've thought so much about it and discussed it with my husband, and now I discuss it with them because they're older. So some of these pieces I wrote when they were young, but waited until now to publish, now that they're really keyed into my writing life. And also they share with their teachers and their peers and their friends their own stories. So my son has shared with everybody that he knows about this genetic syndrome, so on. And he's actually now on board and would like to co-author with me a piece specifically about it, because he and I both know it's not really well known, but probably a lot more people than we realize have some kind of a microdeletion that could, if genetic testing were made available and accessible, then it could really help. So now that he's of a certain age that he can participate, I feel that sense of permission. But I have to say this, our last name is Smith, and it's the most common surname in the country.
That helps, right?
I feel outside of our social circle, within our social circle, everybody knows our stories. Outside of it, I don't know if anyone could ever identify this particular Smith boy as being my particular Smith boy. So
Right.
I'm very fortunate about being a
Yeah,
Smith.
that's helpful. I think that's so beautiful that he wants to participate and co-author with you. That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm working on poems now, and then after that project, it's our next project that we're working on together.
Nice. Because it's something that really struck me throughout the book, and especially in this essay, and that's partially why I wanted you to read that excerpt, is just that I feel like what you accomplish throughout the book is it's like instructive to the reader, but it's not in this like, I'm going to teach you, it's just you really broaden the reader's experience and knowledge based on describing your own experience, right? And you get the reader thinking about, well, what is typical and what is considered atypical? And I just think that that's amazing because, like you said, there could be so many other people out there that don't realize that maybe they've got this diagnosis or some loved one has that diagnosis, and it can shed light. And also just in terms of, being more compassionate and more accepting of differences between people in the world, right? So I think that you're really good at that. And I wonder, like, when you write, are you conscious of, is that something that you write towards Or is it just something you just have this natural ability that unfolds?
I am conscious of it. I tell my students all the time, if you're going to come at people head on with information, it's really hard to get through. But the very first language humans had, we used it to tell each other stories. And that's how you can convey information. So I just feel like it's a privilege to be able to tell my stories, and perhaps there's an instructional or an informational aspect to it. So I do think about it.
Great. Well, you're accomplishing it for sure. So in the interest of time, I think it would be great for you to read your last selection. But before we do that, I want to also just take a quick look inside the book, and I wanted to do a shout out to the artist who did the cover. And inside the book, for those who don't already have a copy, there's these beautiful pages that are, I'm not sure what this kind of paper is. It vellum? Is that what that would be called? That's see-through. And so then the page behind it shows that has the title of the next section, and they're throughout. And I just found that makes such a beautiful touch. I really appreciated in this book, and you probably can't see it's like the print is not showing up in my light, but I love the font. Like the design element of this book is so gorgeously done.
Littoral Books does makes amazing books, and I had no idea. It's Allison Hildreth, the artist. Check out her website; it's just stunning. And it was a surprise to me. So when I first saw the cover, I just took my breath away. I think at first I saw sort of these jagged, like, slices and canvas, and then of course I saw, kind of mountains, and then I saw butterflies. There's just so much.
I see the butterflies. Yeah.
Thank you. And I just thought, oh, these are just beautiful small things. So I'm so glad you gave Allison a shout out for that.
So why don't you go ahead and read your last selection?
Okay. All right. So this is called Men Come Here. Men come here like they own the place. Roll up the road, bump over the apron, and tear through the gravel, leaving dirt tracks. I hear them before I see them, hear their pickups, dump trucks, vans, music through cracked windows. Sometimes they idle before getting out. I hear their boots. The divorcee who used to live here installed a security system. My husband and I debated disconnecting it, but he's a true crime reporter who covers murders, and I'm alone here during the day. A security technician came to fix the wiring. He walked from room to room, aligning each window sensor and commenting on photos. "Is that you?" he said, looking back and forth between me and a honeymoon shot. He stuck a red sign to the back door, letting one of the cats out. The cat let himself back in because he's scared of bees and the outdoors. The furnace repairman loves the cats. While fixing the motor, he welcomed them into the hot closet. On his second visit to replace some pump or gauge, he didn't go straight to the furnace, just stayed in the hall, talking and petting. We used to live in Manhattan on the 10th floor of a midtown building. Now we're in a house, something I've always wanted. My husband trains to the city, and I take care of our boys, our house and yard. The deal was, since my husband would be spending more hours out of the house, I would take up more of the chores, garbage, weeding, scooping muck from gutters. But I was naive. I didn't know how many tasks I couldn't do myself, how many men I would need. I work from home to pay bills for things like security and furnace repair. We live in a safe town, but I paid an electrician to install a motion sensor on the garage spotlight. He told me about his thing with numbers. I like them to be even. To the kitchen ceiling, he said, 7 cable heads, I'd like to see 8. The spotlight switch was up, but the bulb wasn't on. The electrician hunted for a second switch, hoping to force the two to agree. I need all the switches to be aligned, he said. He found 2 more switches and chafed at the riddle. The electrician ran out of time before he could rewire the shed's coach light, so he sent his apprentice a week later. I watched from the dining room as he bolted from the shed, leapt over the stone wall, and crisscrossed the grass, screaming, "Fuck, fuck." When he calmed down, he told me through the screen, "Yellow jackets, they stung me like 50 times." He pulled up his pant leg. 3 red bumps swelled near his ankle. "I'm sorry," I said, followed by the only other thing I could think of. If my kids were home, they would have been scared. He pushed his pant leg down and straightened. "I'm fine, thanks for asking." I shut and latched the glass door. So then a pest controller came for the yellow jackets. He slid over the retaining wall in his protective white suit, sprayed an old log, and left. Septic called ahead, cleaned out the tank, and curled a stamped yellow postcard in the door handle. Oil never leaves, just leaves his rig on the road and drags the hose to the external fill point. Our second fall in the house, stormwater cut through our lawn, bringing with it sticks and leaves, shards of Corona bottles, used Band-Aids. Water soaked the living room. I called a landscaper and led him down the new creek bed that now bisected our yard. He poked the mud with his wolverines and asked me questions about my house, my background, my parents. I told him both my parents are dead. Before he left, he hugged me. He came back a few days later with an estimate. Again, a hug. He hugged me and said he was sorry about the recent death of my mom, about both my parents. He shook his head. I texted my husband and 2 friends. Is it weird that a landscaper hugged me? Yes, they said, landscapers shouldn't hug homeowners. I don't want him to come back, I said. No, they all agreed. Tell him not to come back. I wrote an email. I made up a story, said my mother-in-law knows a landscaper she trusts. We live in a safe town, and I'm a low-risk victim, but I made up the story rather than tell him to stop it with the hugging because I'm alone here during the day, and he knows where I live. Meanwhile, we still had water in the living room. I called a contractor. "What a beautiful spot," he said. "You don't even need to lock your doors." So many doors, lock, 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 lock. So many windows, 18 on the ground floor alone. I didn't realize the whole first year we lived here that one living room window wasn't actually locked. Couldn't lock since the keeper was missing. At the hardware store, I tried to match the sliding sash exactly, but the new keeper didn't fit. With a drill, I widened the opening. It still didn't line up. I drilled, drilled, drilled to force it. I slid the lock closed and pounded on the window with a rubber mallet until I couldn't open it again. I told my husband, I fixed the lock. Don't ever try to open that window. We live in a safe town, and I pay men to check and fix and fill and empty things I can't. Men sweep the chimney and insulate the well. 1 patched a crack in the foundation. 3 dug a drainage easement. It took 4 men to cut down the dead yellow birch. Men come here to make the place safer, and I lock all the doors and windows, lock myself into this house I've always wanted. Thank you.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
So we've got 15 minutes for Q&A, and I see there's some things in the chat I haven't seen through the whole process, and I don't know if there's any questions in there. So I guess if anybody wants to ask Suzanne a question, you could either unmute and just say, hey, and ask your question. Otherwise, if you don't feel comfortable with that and you'd rather type it in, you can type your question into the chat and we'll have Suzanne answer. And if nobody wants to start out, I have another question that I can get the ball rolling. But I want to give everybody an opportunity. Sarah.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hi,
That was
Sarah. Thank you.
so much of what you write is like so personal and delicate. How do you decide what to read out loud? Like what feels comfortable saying? Because I know like some of it you just don't even want to read out loud, right? So how do you go through and decide what feels right to be read, and for each audience you have a process for that?
That's such a great question, because so as somebody with OCD, I have a spreadsheet of all the pieces and their length and the time it takes me to read them and kind of the style and content. But I really spent a lot of time with this. So with this one, Laurie and I just went back and forth about, we wanted 3 and which ones would really help illuminate the questions that she had for me. But I also, I'll also trim out details of pieces if they don't feel right when I'm practicing them. But yeah, and then I've also gone to some friends to ask, so if I have an event where it requires a longer piece to read, I'll ask a friend or ask Justin, what do you think would most resonate? So yeah, I work with my partners, and then I ask trusted friends. So Sarah, I'm actually going to be sending you an email to ask for input. I'm going to be reading at a women's prison, and I would love your input as to what piece or pieces you think might work. So look for that sometime soon.
So I see a question from Claire. Talk to us about how you ordered the sections.
Oh, that was such work. I ordered in terms of which kind of anxiety would come first and last. That was based on which essays I wanted to come first and last. So the first section really was because the first piece was a piece about PTSD. And so I needed that to come first. But in terms of how the pieces within the section actually was quite easy, because I just did it chronologically. And so each section begins back in time and then progresses forward in time. And Agnes and her team did a beautiful job doing a little timeline. And then we go back in time again to start the next sort of anxiety disorder and its 6 species. So I should say the first and last sections, they came pretty easy. Within the sections was pretty easy, but deciding the middle 3, I really, really struggled to get it just right. And I was futzing with it right up to the very end, right before I sent it to Littoral. So sometimes I wonder if it's still right, but.
That's so interesting. I love hearing that you were futzing with it up until the very last moment, That just seems so writerly.
Yeah.
So Jillian, is there a difference between a flash essay and a prose poem? These pieces sound wonderfully prose poetic.
Yeah, well, and interestingly, at least 2 of these pieces began as poems and then moved to prose poems and then moved to flash. There is a difference. Prose poetry, line breaks still matter. White space on the page matters quite a lot. Compression, of course, matters, figurative language and all of that. But I will say that when I think about the genre of creative nonfiction, you go from very outward looking to very inward looking and lyric and experimental. And I see flash can live down there. And that's the closest neighbor to poetry. So it's quite true that, and I've seen a lot of poets then work in prose, this kind of prose, and then prose writers like me, I'm now jumping into poetry. So there's a relationship, but there's still, rules are meant to be broken, but there's still some guidelines that govern a prose poem that don't necessarily govern a flash essay.
Is there anybody else who wants to raise their hand? see. Maybe I can ask my question that I didn't get to, which was kind of in relation to your reading of the final essay, Men Come Here. And so how is writing like this transformative? Do you find that writing about things like fear helps you to resolve issues by widening your perspective and raising your self-awareness?
Definitely. Writing in general is transformative for me, but writing these small things, as somebody with anxiety, if I don't write, then I ruminate. So the writing is an act of just breaking that cycle and drawing it out of my head and putting it onto paper. And then the act of really reflecting on what's there allows me to kind of dig down and do what Sasha Feinstein, who's a mentor that we all know, some of us know from VCFA, always said, slow down where it hurts. It's me slowing down where it hurts, slowing this tiny thing, which might, the landscaper hug is 3 seconds. So slowing that way down, you find the pain point inside. And then by crafting it, I find that I then gain agency over the moment. I find it's my response to different hurts. Or if the man who said that to me when I was holding my son, I did speak to him in the moment, but I tend to then write, and it's like my little revenge in a way. It's like I gained agency over it. I now own this story. Instead of him lobbing this into my life, now I have crafted my response. And it's really how I go through life as a person with anxiety. It's really assuages all of that anxiety. So, yeah.
Do you find that some of your anxieties have dissipated somewhat after, like, are you less fearful of men coming around after writing that essay? No.
No, I will say therapy and medication and meditation and writing are all really useful tools. But I still get a little when I hear the gravel. Like, who is it? And now my husband works home. Thanks to the pandemic, he works from home 2 days a week. And I just love those days. I love those days. So, yeah. And now, of course, with each new experience in life, new anxieties are being kicked up. So now that my boys are older and out exploring the world a little bit more, I have more anxiety growing about it. So,
That tends to happen with parenthood.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop, right?
I can imagine 20 years from now, a book called "And Even More Small Off Things" by Suzanne Farrell-Smith. Just keeps happening.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit? I was really excited to hear that you're writing poetry. Can you share a little more about that?
Sure, yeah. So I'm working on just a chapbook length of poems that are all related to becoming a mother right as I lost my mother. And so this idea of being a motherless mother. And so a lot of the poems are rooted in when she died, when my kids were just so little and then just kind of feeling off kilter. So yeah, it's been a real joy to work on things so tiny and to spend, I don't have a lot of writing time right now, but if I have 10 minutes to spend it just looking for that one word, the word that is the right one, I find it to be such pleasure. And in poetry, it's not quite as revealing. I mean, they're all autobiographical, but you can play and create and fudge and extend and compress and compile and do things that, CNF, and do some masking. So it's been really fun to play in that space. And I think it's been therapeutic too after this book came out. Yeah.
I'm excited for that.
Yay.
All righty, well, unless anybody has any other questions, we're kind of at our hour mark.
Katie
This has
had
been-
one.
Thanks, Sarah. I did have a quick one. Hi. Oh, this was so brilliant, Suzanne. And this was just the best night in such a long time. So thanks for sharing your gorgeous work with us. You know, I feel like too, this book is so needed at this moment because anxiety is a huge, mental health struggle for a lot of kids. And so with my mom hat and my teacher hat on, I think too about kind of the span of your work and how kids don't get to write like this. They don't get to write the pieces that you wrote about hard things in life. And maybe the smallness of the pieces makes it easier to write about hard things. I'm not sure. But what are your thoughts about how, with anxiety on the rise for kids and teens, like we should revolutionize the way that kids experience what it means to be a writer so they can do what you've done, and kind of release the hard things?
It's a great question. And, in so many schools, young kids are taught to write small, but they're called watermelon seed moments, right? So they're taught to look at your watermelon as your life and pick a tiny seed and write about it. But they are kind of encouraged to write the best moment of my summer vacation, my favorite teacher, how I want to convince my mom to get me a dog. And I think taking that same structure, it wouldn't be difficult at all to prompt, what's the hardest thing that you did yesterday? And just to come up with a whole series of different prompts that can live within that same watermelon and watermelon seed framework that they have come to understand. But I do agree that the chance to write like this, and then as we've talked about before, Katie, then to share it in being vulnerable to share it in a safe space and be able to talk, that takes a really gifted facilitator to do that. And I think especially once you get to the middle and high school level, it's more needed than ever. So how can instructors be trained to facilitate that kind of really important bonding and necessary conversation around pieces like that? Completely agree. Maybe you'll work. Oh, hi, Sandy. Maybe that'll be, we should collaborate on a project, Katie. Let's work on it.
I just
Katie,
want to thank everybody. I don't mean to break in, but we are at the hour, and I just want to thank the author and the interviewer tonight for a wonderful program. And just to remind you that it is being recorded and it will be on the website so that you can enjoy it again and share with your friends. How about some final words from both of you, and then we'll call it a night. And thank you to the audience for your wonderful questions.
And my final words are just a huge thank you. Of course, Laurie, loved your questions and guiding me through this. And just thank you, everyone, for spending an hour with me tonight. It's just delightful to see you all.
It was so fun. If you haven't gotten Suzanne's book and read it yet, get it. That's what I have to say. Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Suzanne, for asking me to do this with you. It was such a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.